Hello, everyone. I know that we're live on Facebook and we're just working out a few of the technical details. So just hang with us for just another short 60 seconds and we'll get going with introductions and the presentation with Dr. Lisa Strohman and Kayla Bettis. So just hang tight for another moment. Thanks for your patience. Okay, here we go. So, it's just so apropos that we're in the world of living virtually and in technology, and then we're having technological complications, but this is just what we're doing and we're rolling with it. So thank you everyone who's tuning in the Vail Valley and possibly beyond this evening for this extraordinary conversation with Dr. Lisa Strohman and Kayla Bettis. So I just wanted to welcome everyone to November's Eat Chat Parent. Do you know what your children are watching online? And this presentation is presented by Dr. Lisa Strohman. And Dr. Lisa Strohman is a clinical psychologist. She's also an attorney, and she is the president of the Digital Citizen Academy. Dr. Strohman has become widely known for her advocacy and education around the material around mental wellness as it relates to our digital lives, which we're living in daily at this point. She's worked with thousands of parents and schools and children from around the globe. She has established the Digital Citizen Academy as a prevention and diversion training program that is focused on eliminating core issues like cyberbullying, children luring, and suicide. The DCA is offered to schools with an in-home plan that educates, empowers, and inspires balance and pro-social use of technology. Also joining us tonight for reflection and a peek into what is happening with our teens and in our valley is Kayla Bettis. And Kayla is the outreach operations manager for Eagle Valley Behavioral Health. She holds a master's degree in clinical mental health and school counseling. And prior to her work with EVBH, Kayla spent 10 years in law enforcement, and she was a school counselor in our district and has worked in community mental health for over a decade. She is a beloved counselor to many families, children, and parents alike, and her straightforward and compassionate approach is a gift to our valley. So we're so lucky to have her here this evening. So if you're tuning in and you'd like closed captioning in Spanish, there is a gear icon in the bottom right of Zoom. And if you click on that and click on captioning, it will turn on the Spanish subtitles for you. And before we go any further, I wanted to take a moment to let you know about Olivia's Fund. Through generous private donors and foundations who wish to support behavioral health services, and recognize that many individuals cannot obtain those services because of financial barriers, Eagle Valley Behavioral Health has created Olivia's Fund to support individuals that are in need of mental health services. Olivia's Fund will provide financial assistance to anyone who lives or works in Eagle County to help pay for mental health and/or substance use services for up to 6 sessions per person per year. And to my knowledge, they have expanded those number of sessions currently. Olivia's Fund will cover anyone in need of behavioral health services, regardless of insurance or immigration status. And if you look in the chat, you will see a link to an application where you can also find more information. EVBH wants you to know that if you are struggling, there is help and there is always hope. Please see the link in the chat for more information or go to eaglevalley.bh.org. And I wanted to thank our sponsors, Eagle Valley Behavioral Health, Vail Health, Alpine Bank, Vail Resorts Epic Promise, Slifer Smith and Frampton Foundation, the towns of Avon, Eagle, Gypsum, and Vail, the Eagle River Foundation, Vail Valley Cares, SAMHSA, Wells Fargo, Colorado Office of Behavioral Health, and Eagle County Government. And please stay tuned until the end of this presentation. We have an unplugged giveaway, which is a gift certificate to Moe's, a puzzle, and a jail where you can put your technology away so you can unplug as a family. and have a night of connection. Phew, these intros just take a really long time. So thanks for sticking in there with me. And without further ado, please welcome Dr. Lisa Strohman. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Amy. And I really do appreciate you bringing me back. Last time I was there, I got to be there in person. So it's nice to be back in the Valley and talking to everyone. I wanted to say at the outstart, if there's anything in here, I did go back through and look through all of the presentations and the press releases, and I noticed that it was inviting some children to be in there. So if Amy, if you can kind of check the chat and make sure, but I will let anybody know. I cut out some of the slides that I had previously put in there, but just wanted to make sure that you know that I'm only presenting things that I've actually seen in either the elementary school level or middle school level or above. So with that, I will start and get us going on what it is that I've been dealing with. And we've all been dealing with actually, but I've spent a ton of time over the summer, probably as Kayla has as well, but dealing with kids that have been under pandemic like quarantine, that they've been locked behind their devices. And the realities that come along with that is that they are actually in a position now where they have started to spend more and more time online that is not being overseen as much by parents. A lot of times parents are having children have device access that didn't have device access before. So I'm going to talk about really what I'm seeing as a trend. And this is nationally from my perspective, having spent a ton of time over that. I'm going to highlight a story that actually just happened recently. I had a 12-year-old girl. This reminds me of her because she, in every single Zoom call I had with her over the summer, she had a hoodie on. So I just pulled this picture for it. But it really was significant to me that as the sessions went on through the summer, there's a lot of children here in Arizona. We had over 38,000 kids that lost services instantaneously when the schools closed. So I'm sure in your setting as well, there's a lot of kids that had access to counseling services that immediately didn't have any access anymore. So this is one of those girls. And so I put in about 100 hours a month of donated time to talk to kids that the school counselors just couldn't get to anymore. So we had a lot of abuse. We had a lot of situations where kids were home alone. We had situations where my partnership with Gaggle, which is a school monitoring program that I'm working with, has been very instrumental in letting us see what is happening behind the scenes. But this 12-year-old really had gotten into a situation where, as she was trying to be more social with her friends, started to share information about who she was, where she lived, and actually decided that she was going to go meet someone that she thought was a peer aged person in the same school as she was in. And by all accounts, from her statements and from everything that even in the police reports that we looked at, there was actually evidence where she was given evidence from this quote unquote peer where she thought that she was going to meet another 12-year-old young boy at a park. And in fact, she showed up and there was a 38-year-old man. So it was a very extremely close call. And in that situation, it was probably about 3-month period of conversation that had occurred in that situation. And her response, which is very indicative of lots of teenagers and even older elementary school kids, is that this person was a friend of a friend. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how technology allows people to feel like they might know some other people or know somebody because a common friend actually knows who they are. And in this situation, she relied on that information and unfortunately ended up showing up to be somewhere where she could have been put into danger. So the first question I always ask, and this is interesting, I've been talking about this for about a decade, but is technology really the problem? Because when I first started this push, and it really was about a decade ago, maybe longer, it really, to me, seemed like I was that person. I've got a 12 and a 13-year-old, so I'm in this with anybody who has kids that are at the age where people are using technology and leaning into it really heavily. But even when they were young kids, I recognized that maybe it wasn't just the kids themselves or the technology themselves. So these are all real devices, and the iPod was a real product that is on the market. And these digital I would say experiments almost, but this way that the tech industry was like really kind of submersing and making it very accessible to kids and getting us used to. The illumination on the lower left-hand corner, for instance, is actually an audio response system where if a baby is crying in the crib, instead of a parent needing to show up, actually the parent's voice can be pre-recorded into it, or this light show comes on. And so obviously as a psychologist, I look at that and I think, you know, this is a response situation. We want our children, when they're in need of us, to call out, and we show up. So again, I don't think it's necessarily the technology itself all the time, but it might be the position that we put ourselves in as adults and as kind of leaders in communities of when we're going to hand it to them, because these children clearly aren't getting the devices themselves. And as they age into these older ages, I think that it becomes really synonymous with their free time, and it's more comfortable for them, oftentimes, for them to be in it. So I call upon this, these are pictures of adults, but I call upon often when I'm at conferences pre-pandemic, or I'm traveling. Even now, I've been traveling more and more, people on planes and things like that. People really aren't connecting anymore. And again, the pandemic, I'm going to give a little bit of excuse for, because we're social distancing, but really it has been this community kind of push where we kind of go into our devices and we find out very much into these kind of silos of what the people we already know, and we're not talking to other people, and we're not communicating and really bringing in more information. And I think our kids are watching us. It's clear because I think that when you think about early devices, I ask this question often. Sometimes I throw in a poll, but I wanted to leave time for questions of what age first personal devices for a child to have of their own. And I think that it's surprising to people, because oftentimes we're giving children older phones. We're not giving children the phones that are specifically, we're going out to the store, the service provider, and buying for themselves, but we might be updating or upgrading our own phones, and then we hand our old devices to our kids. It doesn't say much about, if you look at the age that they have their own devices, it doesn't mean that they aren't proficient before that. So I believe it was a Kaiser study, and I know Pew Research also, if anybody's interested in it, looked at it, but the proficiency of young children really starts at around 3 years of age, which you just have to kind of take that in for a minute, that if you hand a device to a child like an iPad, it's really intuitive to them, and they can figure out how to use it so quickly that it becomes very easy for them to continue on and use it that way. The situation with cell phones in middle school, so if we're going to jump ahead, in elementary school, obviously, like, schools often give devices, but in middle school, there's well over 90% of those kids that have a device when they're walking into school. My daughter's in 8th grade. I have one in 6th grade, but my daughter's in 8th grade. And I talked to the principal actually yesterday, and she's one of 3 students out of a campus of about 800 that doesn't have a cell phone on campus. So it's caused a lot of issues socially, obviously, for her, because she doesn't have access. If a teacher's asking her to download something or take pictures of something in the classroom, she doesn't have a device on her. So it is becoming challenging as a parent. And again, when we look at how early the beginnings are, that kids are really starting on them, you can really see the difference by the time they get into middle school and certainly into high school. And we can talk a little bit at the end on that. This one I wanted to make sure everybody knew. I'm not going to show any pictures right now, but I think it's really important to understand, particularly over the summer, how explosive this issue became of viewing inappropriate content online. If you look at the average age of first viewing, shockingly, it is 2nd grade. And so I'm going to stop for a second there and just like think back. If you don't have a child, or your child's older than that, that's typically the age, around 8 years old, where they first get exposed. And it's usually incidental or accidental, or some kids trying to make something out of a post or something that they've seen online, potentially from an older sibling. But the second number to me is even more important, is that by 11 years old, we're talking between 5th and 6th grade, we have kids that are chronically viewing inappropriate postings and materials on a regular basis, which means more than twice a week, every week. So if you think about, if that's the statistic that we're looking at, over 150 images every year for a young child. And those are some images and some content that the kids can't backtrack from. And it's challenging as a psychologist, and I'm sure Kayla will talk about kind of your area as well. Most people aren't talking about this, and kids certainly aren't talking to parents about it. So I think as counselors, to me, it's very interesting that kids have kind of become desensitized to some of this information and some of the things that they're seeing online. So to me, it's something to look out for because it influences other things. One specifically is self-harm and suicidality or attempted suicides. There has been, when we looked at the decade worth of research that was done in 2017, looking at that 2006 to 2016, 2006, I'll remind you, is when our first smartphone was released into our communities. And so we had a 200% increase in girls and a 50% increase in boys. And that's not even including in the data the statistics that have to do with self-harm. So for me, this is a really big overlapping issue of when they're getting content and exposure to information that might be above their head, developmentally, certainly upsetting. And it's something that as a psychologist, as a parent, as a community member, I think that our kids deserve better in order to help them understand and get through this information, because it is something that they are viewing. So I'm going to talk about technology generally as a gateway, and I'm going to pause for a second. I'm just going to check the chat just to make sure that there's no Q&A. But Amy, if you want to interrupt me if something pops in and somebody wants to say something, or Kayla as well. But generally, what I'm going to say is that I think that technology is here as something that we need to look at always, as something that our children are going to have to figure out, like our food. So, in any situation, we can't live without food. Some people have issues with eating or dieting or things like that, but it is something we have to figure out a balance with, because our children will not have any situation where they will be able to live without technology ever moving forward. Not in this world. They have to learn how to use it. So let's see. So here's where we found out over the summer our kids were spending time. So I'm going to pause for just a second and go kind of through each one of these. I think everybody probably knows most of them. And I think it says that you should use the question section on the Zoom if you wanted to post a question. But if you look at where our students were over the summer, this is where they were. And starting at about 12, we looked at about 14 hours per day, which was incredibly high. And that was also a shift in something where we have a lot of information where they were actually staying up, and their shifting hours basically had them up in the middle of the night. When again, we look at some of that parent monitoring access through the partnerships that I have, it was really incredible to see. I wouldn't have believed it myself. And that's why it's so important to me to share this data with everyone. Somebody just posted in Adopt Me and Among Us, both also very popular. I did this presentation. I think that the Among Us crowd or the information wasn't quite as ubiquitous at the time, but yes, those are two other ones that are very popular with kids. In fact, my son asked me today if he could play Among Us, and we don't do video games during the week. So he always tries when I'm busy to try to sneak that time in. So, but these are all the things that kids are doing. And what I would like to say, Among Us is just a video game. It's very collaborative in some respects. I posted on my drlisastrohman.com website an article about why I think Among Us is very dangerous. I think that it insinuates a lot of information in there that we have to be thoughtful of whether or not we can trust people or not trust people. It can also be really fun, and kids can have a lot of fun on it. So I don't think it was intended to create this kind of imposter syndrome where kids are learning how to like attack each other and lie to each other and do all these things. But it certainly was a side effect that I started noticing with some of the schools and the kids that I was working with. The two on here that I'm going to mention, I think that everybody knows what TikTok is. I think there's been a lot of conversations about TikTok. I think that there's a program or a presentation that I've done that I have video of TikTok as I'm scrolling through some of the stories and the information that goes in there. You don't have control when your children are on that. And I think a lot of times kids say, well, I'm on private and I'm not going to share that. I'm actually going to share with you a video that I found last night as I was trying to pull like content that was contemporaneous to this talk of a Line Live video that a 9-year-old put on there. And so I think that what we have to remember is that even though these apps are really made for kids that are 13 and above, typically, which I think is still too young, there's a lot of younger kids that are on it. And so when you have that mix of ages on some of these apps, you're going to find things and information on there that you may not know or may not want them to see. YouTube is one of my least favorite for young kids just because it takes them into areas, portals, information that you may not want them to be exposed to. And it's really hard to track in that respect. YOLO is You Only Live Once, which was the old Ask FM app for those of you that remember that one, but it's very highly contagious for bullying. And so it oftentimes will sweep through a school and then it'll become less popular and then might come popular again. But it's basically where you can kind of ask anybody anonymously anything you want, or you can say something to somebody anonymously. And so I think that if you think about like emotionally charged teenagers or even older elementary school kids, it gets quite dicey and upsetting, the things that they can post on there. And then the heart is the like me, that one to me is like, that's where, again, like it's almost like a streaming so that kids can show who they like and why they like each other and things like that. But again, it goes back to that curiosity with kids and why they want to be, meeting other kids and social and all those things. And so I think that there's a lot of ways that kids got out of hand over the summer. One of the things I would say is the gaming. I was going to get to that we kind of moved on. Fortnite is still popular, but we do have lots of the Among Us is particularly one. Addictinggames.com. This is an old shot, but every time that there's a new game, they put it on there. The old gaming conferences that used to happen and kids trying to compete to be part of a unit for mostly, I would say, like on the online games that they're trying to become sponsored is still very, very popular, but it's not in these massive warehouses in Las Vegas where you might find some of the older events taking place. They're all pretty much online. And then I think that there's a question right now about Common Sense Media. Common Sense Media, I think, is a really great site. I think it's a free site. The issue I have with Common Sense Media is that they tend to use parent resources. So you'll have parents that go on that may or may not understand a game or play the game with their kids. And so what I find on there is there's a lot of kind of approval or endorsement of this game is appropriate for X age, where I think that it really has to lie with the parent. So for instance, I think that one of the examples is Minecraft. So Minecraft, I think, is a really great game, oftentimes for kids to play together. And particularly if you're, as a parent, one of the things I suggest, if you're going to have a core group of kids that you want them to play with, I think that you go in and you buy your own server and have kids go into a server that you control. And so I'm going to show a picture that may or may not want you may not want your kids to see, so I'll give just a second on it. But I want to just give you an example of a screenshot that I got. And Kayla, if you're in law enforcement, you know this, but I got the screenshot. This is a Minecraft porn shot. And this image was sent to me by an investigator. This is a Minecraft image where somebody hacked in and actually went into a very populated game and started posting in and doing sexual acts with Minecraft computerized versions of it. So I hope you find that shocking, because I think that for me, I would like to know, like, okay, if my kids are going to be in here, I need to know that this exists. Roblox has the same issue, and this is for very young kids. And I would remind parents and everyone, community members, to remember that people that are in this world that are going after kids sometimes do it because they get excited by the reaction that they get. Sometimes they're going after it very specifically to lure or groom a child to meet them in person or create a relationship with them, a trusting relationship with them. Sometimes they go into these gaming platforms and try to create reasons to go into private chats with them. And so as a parent, anytime you're going to let a child go on any sort of platform, you have to have a conversation that, my words are that there are tricky people. There are definitely tricky people online. And I never use strangers, because everyone online is a stranger to our children. So I think that we just need to remember that these tricky people are out there, and we don't want our kids to be terrified, but we certainly want them to be prepared. And we want them to understand it. And then I added this one in, maybe because I'm kind of nerdy in terms of the brain science, but this is a graphic on violent video games. And so if you want to look at the top level before training, the two brains, the top and the bottom, are very similar. After 1 week of video games, when you're looking at the bottom brain, that's after 1 week of video games, I think it's 4 hours a day. You see how much of that outside area of the brain, which is that critical thinking, the ability to focus, to control our emotions, is shut down. And then after 2 weeks, again, you see it kind of rebound a little bit, because our brain starts to equalize and tries to come back, but it certainly isn't at pre-violent video game performance. So my recommendation in the world of online gaming is, specifically, if you're going to let them game, which I think is fine with limitations, you certainly don't, in my world, would want a developing brain to do it in a violent video game setting, because I think that is definitely something that can impact us more than other ones. There's a question, it says, do violent movies have the same sort of effect on the brain reaction? Very interesting. That's a great question, Diana. It's different in some respects, because in the gaming platform, you're actually participating. And so in the brain itself, you actually go in as a participant that goes into that fight or flight reaction, which is very similar to what you would see in some sort of military personnel. So when you do these similar studies and you do look at the brain on where somebody's actually going in and they're being attacked, particularly in drone or simulations, it's very similar to the video game. But when you're watching a movie passively, typically it's not actually the same sort of reaction where your cognitive performance goes down in that. So that's a great question. How does a parent define violent, which is a great one, and then Red Dead Redemption, violent. I don't know Red Dead Redemption, but it sounds violent. So I would have to look that up for you, and I will send my information at the end so you can contact me. But I would say anytime a child is playing a video game where they are being asked to participate in a situation where there's killing, maiming. If you think about Fortnite, where you can kill someone, you get extra points shooting someone in the head. You think about Grand Theft Auto, any of those in those series where you're getting points for running people over, abducting women on the sideline. There's a lot of misogyny that's in there. You think about those areas that you see that you wouldn't want your child to participate in or think is okay. That's how I would generally define violent. And I would definitely recommend looking at the ratings. So all of the video games are rated very similarly to TV. And so if you go on there and you look at what those ratings are, that can be very helpful when you're trying to figure that out. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Again, plenty of times to ask questions if anything pops up into your brain, or at the end for sure. Gateway to disordered eating. This is one that I think is very interesting to me. I just gave a talk with Gaggle actually on disordered eating. There's a ton of information out there that, particularly I think with the TikTok and the Instagram and that more visual based presentation of oneself as a youth or as a child, that we're starting to look at how it's impacting their decisions on how they feed themselves, how they take care of their bodies and things like that. this is just a screenshot of a disordered eating pro-Anna lifestyle. So Anna lifestyle is anorexia, and then pro-Mia lifestyle would be bulimia. So there's a lot of these sites that exist for girls. I'll show you a couple of pictures of the things. This is just a listing from a site that talks about various rules of how to be a better anorexic. And so this information, most of the time, this isn't ever on websites anymore that kids are getting this content. It's coming in through posts and who they follow and hashtags. So they're very tricky, the kids nowadays, where they're using like Fit Girls, Eat Clean. These are some of them. There's a new one, Body Positivity. There's a lot of different ones that they put out there that are really kind of seemingly innocuous, but really are projecting, like, how are you putting pictures up of yourself? These are various pictures of girls comparing where they are and where they quote unquote rank in the disordered eating. And I want to say that it definitely isn't just girls. The presentation that I just did, we have 30 million people in the United States alone that suffer from eating disorders, and 1/3 of those are men. So I think what we're seeing with the young boys typically is that they're watching these presentations or posts by male models specifically. A lot of them are fitness gurus or things like that that have, huge chests and six-pack abs and super muscular. And I've got like a prepubescent boy that's like desperate, trying to like catch up with that. And so I've got a lot of kids, and my issue with the boys is more about looking at whether or not they have access to get into even a CVS or a Walgreens or some sort of place where they can buy supplements, because oftentimes they're in there buying, creatine or weight gainers or things like that. And that's, to me, again, in a developing brain, developing body, we don't want our kids to think that that's some, normal for them to try to go after. Again, not all kids, but I just want, again, the visualization, and wanted you to be really aware that that's one area that may seem like it's not at the top of the list, but ultimately long-term, that can be something that they're going to suffer for and with for a lifetime. Okay, so the next area I'm going to talk about is gateway to sex addictions. And so this is an area, if you have any younger kids, there's not a ton, I don't have anything that's inappropriate graphically, but it definitely is sensitive. So one of the areas that I am very disturbed by is the amount of content that is being produced and how it's being viewed. So the virtual reality world that exploded into our Ethernet and has become really now more mainstream, they produce about 100,000 videos per month that are specifically related to pornography. And what I found out at a briefing recently is that they are now pairing, actually for a few years now, are pairing that technology with the ability to Bluetooth connect to haptic technology. So stay with me for just a second. But haptic technology is essentially something that if you put on, it has a ton of microfibers and waves in it. So think about a heating blanket and how the wires go through, and that warms up our blanket for us. So haptic technology in this situation is basically putting on a yoga pant. They put this yoga pant on, they have the VR technology, they sync the devices or the units, I guess. And then if you're watching something on VR and there's somebody climbing up your leg or breathing on your leg or in certain areas, that warms up and it vibrates and it creates a tactile sensation. So this is, to me, one of the most scary projected areas that I see, that once it becomes affordable, mainstream, and accessible, that you're going to see this more and more. And it truly is shifting the way that our girls are seeing themselves. When I think about my young girls at even 5th, 6th grade, you can really identify those already that are doing the faces, taking pictures and posting them online with the kissy faces and things like that. And to me, again, this goes back to they're getting the attention. They're the ones that are getting talked to. And so it really causes this, I guess it's a reward system in a way, in a peer teen group where those girls are getting acknowledged more so than the other girls. So this is a video that I jumped in last night. Please ignore how many tabs I had open at the same time. But I'm going to play it really briefly. This is a little girl on this app that, again, first thing I clicked on, I just looked and I said, I wonder if there's any kids that are underage that are on this. I'm going to let you, oh, let me see if I can play it for you. Oh, there's no audio in the sound. I just heard somebody say that you can't hear it. And I don't know how to make it share so that you guys can hear the audio in the file. Let me explain to you what happened. She basically came on, she has 58 viewers on this app. She came on, her brother's in the background playing a video game, and she had someone on the app come in and ask her to take off her clothes, and then he exposed himself to her. And so if you see her face in this video as she's talking, she's smiling. She isn't really, to me, it doesn't seem like she's that affected by it. She just said, oh, I'm on public and I'm going to tell the world and I'm going to tell everybody what's happening. But again, if you look at her language and how, I know you can't hear it, but she's explaining her story. And then her brother in the background is really basically completely ignoring the entire thing. And he's telling her to get out of his way as she's trying to warn the world, because he's trying to play another video game himself. So I think that it just really goes to the point of how is our young children, how are they talking to each other? You know, I would think, like, I had a brother who was 18 months older, and if somebody would have come at me, in fact, if they did in person, I mean, he was there, he may have hated me and treated me terribly as a sister at home. But if somebody was coming after me at school, like, he was there to protect me, which was always kind of reassuring. And in this situation, the kid's like, you know, get out of my way, you're bugging me. And as she leaves the room, whoever this is that she's talking about sends a heart. And he says, oh, thanks for the heart. What does that mean? Which is a monetary presentation in this app specifically. So this app itself is getting shut down on the 16th. So I was super excited, and I let everybody know in my world that I was so excited that it was shutting down. This one, unfortunately, is not. This is Line Live. So if you think about what you just saw with this little 9-year-old and where that's going to go to and how many people you're going to view, if you look at this woman down here, she has 7,802 people watching her presently. This one has 223. So I think I picked, I picked this young girl. And again, I looked at her. She was actually out streaming. I don't have the video here, but she went outside, and she lives in basically a trailer out in the country, and she's talking to people, and she looks very sweet and innocent here. She did not look that way, and she's walking around. Here's another one that I came across, 217 different views at the time that I popped onto it. And then I just wanted you to look at the chat that that young girl that you saw the video of that you couldn't hear. I apologize for that. But here's some of the chat language that you might see along with some of those things. So it takes 6 people when I pop onto the chat for somebody to tell her to open her legs. Right. So this is like very young girls getting direction. And oftentimes in some of the video footage that I can't show you, that you see these really young girls, I can tell that they're actually in a kitchen environment with a parent in the background. And so I really want to encourage parents not to assume and not to play not my kid. I pulled up the boys that are on the same app because I had a parent one time said, well, so if they go on and they get to talk to some people, you know, what's the big deal? They're not social, you know, they're in a pandemic, they need to talk to people. And I said, well, then just check out who they're talking to. And if you're okay with them talking to people like this, and who those people are on the apps, and understand that they can actually go into a joint presentation. So this is one that I popped in on. And again, I won't play the video, but they're talking with one another, and it takes him about 4 seconds to ask her to do something inappropriate. I would say that as a parent myself of a 13-year-old girl, it terrifies me that this stuff exists. I look at some of the TikTok videos that are getting presented and put out there. My niece actually, I don't know why it's my best friend's daughter, but she allows her to go on there. And some of the presentations and the posts that I see that she does on there, I know the attention that they're going to get for that. And so we have to really educate our young girls on the right kind of attention versus the wrong kind of attention. And in their brains, they've never gone through it before. So we have to remember as the adults in the room that they don't understand that. And so we have to be able to have some sort of conversation in that way. This one has a picture that might be a little bit upsetting, but I just wanted to let you know, 1 in 6 teens right now. There's some statistics that say it's 1 in 5 during the pandemic. And so it's escalating in numbers. The reason why I show some of these pictures, and these are posts of Art of Depression, is because it becomes very, I don't want to call it trendy that people are harming themselves because it's something that they think that they should do just to be noticed. Sometimes they call it sad fishing. There's other names that kids call it. Typically when somebody is harming or thinking about self-harming, there is a pain, internal emotional pain that they're trying to suffer. They're trying to figure out and trying to get through. And this is the one way that they feel like that they can get rid of that pain. And that, to me, it's really important to recognize that we need to ask the question about the why and not be judgmental in that conversation. Because oftentimes what I've seen over the last 15 years is a lot of times these kids are saying, every one of those marks means a battle that they won, and that they're very happy that that meant that they're still alive. And so if we come in and we start to kind of judge or address that as a negative thing for themselves, like it may not go over very well, and they may shut down and not talk to you anymore. I think that this is pretty self-explanatory. We have a ton of things that are impacting our kids. One of the things I didn't talk about today, just because it's not about the mental health of kids and it's not about what they're looking at, but is also the identity theft, which is happening in massive numbers right now. And I think that it's important to remember that it's one of those things that as parents that we need to pay attention to and just check on our own for our kids. Carol had a question that she popped in and said, can self-harm be contagious? So before I move on, I would say it definitely can be socially rewarding in the sense, and I don't know, contagious might not be the right word, but I get what you're saying. And it definitely is something that ends up being where kids see that other people are getting attention, or they see that it's helping that other person. And so it tends to be something that you might see happening in cohorts, and it might bloom through a school or, some sort of community, because we've got some kids that are looking at what other kids are doing. So it's a great question, Carol, to talk about, because I think that, again, it goes back to, for me, I always say, how many of your friends are self-harming? How many kids talk about, their depression? How many kids? I just make the assumption that it's happening, and it makes the conversation much easier. So if a kid really doesn't know what you're talking about, they'll say, like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, why would you ask me that? I would say you're lucky. That's a great place to be in if they don't know about that concept. And what a great time to introduce it and to be able to say, well, I just want to make sure, because I want you to feel safe, and I want to make sure your friends are safe, because I think kids try to take this on themselves and manage it themselves. Sometimes it's a lot. The issue is this online identity versus like real life identity. So in real life, in front of parents, in front of teachers, in front of community members, they act a certain way. And when they go online and they're behind their screens and in their bedrooms, they definitely have this identity that doesn't match what it is that they're presenting on the outside. And so I think it's important to understand that those can sometimes be in conflict with one another. I've got some questions on the self-harming. I may have moved a little bit too fast. As a parent, what do you do to stop self-harming? That's a great question. And one of the first things I would say is you want to be able to understand the why behind it and have a conversation. And I think that if you can approach it in a way that's really understanding, empathetic, and compassionate, and you say, this is something that I recognize, I want you to make sure. Sometimes kids will pretend like it has to do with a cat, or I got in a fight with a dog, or went to a friend's house. But I think that if you kind of open the door and if you're compassionate about it, you can say, Let's talk about the reasons why, and what does that do for you? And can we understand that? One of the things that as a psychologist and cognitive behavioral psychologist, I look at is it's that release that they get with that self-harm, that whether it's your own child or it's another child, but if you talk to them about how do we manifest that release in other ways. So I've got a child. I have a student that I've worked with for about 4.5 years. And she just turned 18 actually a month ago, and she went and got a henna tattoo over her cuts just to kind of cover it up with beautiful flowers to ask. She was trying to figure out, it was on her hip, if she wanted to, cover it up for the rest of her life. And on the bottom of it, she had them put the cursive of her date, which was her end date, the last time that she ever decided to self-harm. So it turned into this very kind of crisis period in her life where she was self-harming over probably a period of about 18 months, having to do with an assault that occurred to her and not being able to talk to anyone about it, and a church group that wasn't really open to hearing or wanting to support anything that she was trying to go through in that situation. And so, for her, those marks were battle wounds for herself. And it was really more indicative of not being able to talk about it and get the right help in the right time. So I think that as a parent, that's what I would do. I'd really keep it open and empathetic and do it that way. How can we tell if our children are involved in this? I think are being affected. I think that what I would say as a parent is ask the question generally. Ask them if they know of anyone in their community, if they have any friends that they know about. It's something that you can put a cause behind. I know that when I was in Vail Valley, the first time it was related to a different issue, I think specifically to suicide. But if you had some kids or you knew something, like what a great community event to come behind and say, it's okay not to be okay, right? It's okay to be hurting. We need to really adopt and accept that it's okay to have pain and emotional hurt. It's not okay in those situations to go through and have something where we're actually harming ourselves and are wounding ourselves in the process of that. So how do we open that up from a peer perspective? Because I think that that's really, really important to do. And of course, Carol's bringing up that there's a lot of covert hashtags over self-harm. And so, and again, I can list that out there. That's a great example. It's very, very important as a parent, if you're monitoring your children's social media, if you're allowing them on social media, to look at what they're posting and see what hashtags they're using and if their friends are doing that. So I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to skip over. I'm going to do this pretty quickly. I just put these on here just to let you know that there's a ton of science behind what is happening in our children's brains, meaning it isn't just, me chicken littling saying that something is happening to our kids. I think everybody on this call is probably recognizing there is fundamentally a change in our children and how they are operating in the world. And there is about 2 decades worth of research that shows that it is invariably changing various areas of their brain. It's changing both the gray matter, which on our brains, that's our ability to think creatively, create our own independent, innovative thoughts. The white matter is specifically that part where it communicates and it takes our thoughts and it transmits it to various places. So it's kind of the superhighway. And the science is very clear. Both areas of the brain are impacted negatively when we have too much, what I kind of call junk technology use. So that's social media, pornography, gaming, any of that stuff that isn't academically, creatively building our brain in positive ways. And that's the part that we have to be most, I think, vigilant against. With kids, of course, there is good news. Well, for probably all of us, there's good news that the neuroplasticity of our brains is what saves us. We have the ability to rewire and rework around damage in our brain. So I would say up until about your 70s, like you've got this ability where if you had a brain injury or a trauma or something like that, your brain actually figures out a way around it. And that's why we have rehab for brains and all of that stuff in the neurology offices and things like that. With kids, because they're so young, they definitely have this neuroplasticity. There's 2 times in their life that they have a huge growth of brain development, and that is in their toddler years, which is when we actually feel like they're tantruming toddlers or terrible twos. And then it happens again probably no surprise to anyone on the call, at their teenage years during puberty. And they're not quite as cute as they were when they were 2, but they're tantruming just as loudly. And that is when their brain has this another bloom of neural growth in the brain. And it really is super chaotic for them. And then you sprinkle in estrogen or testosterone, and it's just absolutely a mess. But that neuroplasticity is what helps them. So if you have kids that are already, you can already tell they're using too much technology, or they might have gone into these different areas, it is something that is solvable. And so I don't want to leave anybody without hope on that. And what I look at is just kind of that's a 3-prong approach, super simple. We want to educate our kids and our families. We want to empower them to make the difference moving forward. And we want to inspire them to have a voice moving forward. And I did write an article about Gen Z and Life 360. So any of you that use Life 360, but Gen Z basically made this massive demand and said we should be able to have some privacy. And we get that our parents want to make sure we're safe, but we also are going to hack and disable and cause all sorts of problems for you. So maybe not the right approach on how they did it, but it did inspire me because I looked at what they said, and basically Life 360 said, all right, come be a voice. And they empowered them to actually come in and be part of that conversation. So I think that that's ideal and what we really, really, really need to do with our kids. I think that I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but Amy brought up, trying to get these out of my way, sorry, that what we do in schools. Right now we're trying to we basically are just giving our program into schools at no cost. We want our kids to be able to have the lessons. We want to provide guidelines, just be a resource for our schools. The diversion part is, to me, probably the most special. Our children will make mistakes. We all make mistakes. We make mistakes. And so when I go into schools and I talk to them, it is ridiculous to think that we're going to hand them devices and that they're not going to step into areas or post things that they shouldn't post, because they're kids and they're curious and they're going to try and look for things. And that's where the partnership with Gaggle that I work with is so incredibly important, that they go into schools, they monitor what's being posted on their Google classrooms and their accounts. And so we can actually see on the back end, actually, if there's any threats. I think that in the pandemic alone, there was over 600 cases where we actually intervened, were able to save a child that was either self-harming or suicidal. So part of what we believe in is, how do we create a little bit of ownership? We want to have the oversight, but we also want to have kids become those leaders in those campuses themselves. I think that that's so important. And then, of course, some of the schools can't have it, or they don't have access to it. And I don't think that that should be something that we don't give parents access to. So we actually kind of mirrored everything and then wrote it for a home version for parents to go through with their kids. So my goal was to get parent resources and information for that. Sorry, I'm apparently starting subtitles for myself on this. And then I have this Unplugged course. I'm going to give you, anybody who wants it, a free copy of my digital book. I just finished my second book. My Unplugged book was my first book. It's very simple. It's like 90 pages and gives some really good ideas. And then we're launching this program for Ask the Expert, because I really do love connecting with families. I did, I think I've done about a dozen programs in the last month, actually, where I'm actually having like live conversations with families and communities. So it's been really helpful to me to answer those directly. And provide family tips and get them from you, because that's always helpful to share information. But the most important in my world is establishing some limits and have balance. So on these Tech-Free Tuesdays we do in our house, so it's ironic to me, my kids actually reminded me that I'm not supposed to be on TV. I did a TV event this morning. Obviously they weren't home. They were not here. They were at school because my kids are back in school. But my kids told me tonight I'm not supposed to be on the computer because it is a Tuesday. So they actually enforce that pretty closely, and it keeps us all accountable. I told them I got a pass for this one. So tomorrow on Veterans Day, we're doing our free tech day. But so some of those things are going to be fun for you and your family to participate in. Daily, weekly limits. For us, my rule is that we don't have technology Monday through Thursday, Friday after school, Saturday, and then Sunday. They get 2 hours just so they can connect and be on with friends and things like that. So I think that, again, that's my rule. It can be anybody's rule. You guys can pick out your own, but think about those 2 hour, that guideline. You don't want your kids to get too much beyond that. The ghost accounts, I think it's really important if you're allowing your child onto an app or onto something that you feel like they should do, or they've talked to you or convinced you that everybody in the world is doing it and they will be the odd man out if they don't do it, then you need to have an account on that app. You need to understand it. You need to participate in it. You need to understand what it is that they're posting. A lot of times parents are making friends with their children's friends. And so that can give you some insight into some of the things that they're doing. And then, of course, leading by example. I cannot tell you how many times that I sit down and look at these conversations with parents or kids, and they're talking to me about like, well, my dad's checking his phone during the meal, or my mom is like driving and texting. Not that it's always mom or dad doing those things, but the kids are actually paying attention to what we're doing. So I think it's really important to have ownership in that, and myself included. I get called out. My daughter last week actually took the phone from me when I was taking her to soccer and put it in the glove compartment because it rang, and I went to see who was calling, and she almost lost her mind with me, like most 13-year-olds probably would do. Routines are important to teach them about putting, for us, like the routine of plugging in phones, putting them downstairs. Even though my kids don't have devices, like that's what we do. They do have devices for school, and so we have a family charging area, and so our routine is everything gets plugged in at night, and that gives them the example of it. And then traditions of think about vacations and family vacations and how important that might be, because I think that from my perspective, a cell phone or a smartphone on a family vacation really is more than just a camera, and it takes them out of that moment and brings them back into the world with their friends. Or if they're on a vacation and they're taking pictures and they're posting, everybody knows that your house is empty. So have a tradition or an example of like, you know, we will take all these great pictures and I'll share them with everybody, and then you can post when we get back. Much safer and a good tradition to keep. And then finally, the community support. I think you probably have one of my favorite communities that I've ever spoken to. I think that you guys are incredible. I started talking with Carol Johnson at first, and then Amy Baker. What an incredible support system you have in terms of like bringing the information and the support that you need to get the help that you can. And Kayla sounds amazing. Her resume speaks for itself, but think outside the box. If you're looking for events, or if you wanted to create maybe a ribbon campaign around self-harm or mental wellness or something like that, who can you ask to create awareness and do campaigns for that and help your community groups in that way? Because I think it's really important for them. I think that it's important for us to recognize that these are all supports for everybody. I promised at the end I would give you a copy of the free book. So hello@thedcacademy.com. That if you just email me and put Vail Health or Vail Valley or whatever you want to put in there, and just put book, please, I will send back, or I'll have my assistant send back a digital copy for you so you can have access to that. I want to thank you so very much, because I think that my experience and my strength is going out and talking to community leaders and support just like you, and having these conversations with everyone helps me build more expertise in the area, but it also helps me bring that expertise to others. So again, I think that it was very important to support one another and lift each other up in that. I will have Amy maybe put in the or I will in the group, my email, so you can have it. It's hello@thedcacademy.com is the email, but I'll have it typed in. And then Kayla, I'm going to turn it over to you, because I know that you have the inside track with everybody and what you're doing on your end. So I'm going to hand it over to you now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lisa. And this was so impactful and necessary, especially during COVID with all of us as parents. I am a step parent as well. I've been with my stepchildren for 10 years. They're now 13 and 16. So I am right in the crux of what we've all been talking about. And in regards to what we're seeing, especially with our children during COVID times within the school district, knowing that our kids are on technology all day in some form or another with their Chromebooks, and then some of our older students in our hybrid model, they're wanting to come home and they're wanting to be on their technology because they say, oh, it's different. No, it's different. That was just school, but they've still been in front of a screen for a majority of the day, and they try to piecemeal it out. And staff and teachers do such a good job about pacing themselves to the best of our abilities. But kids want to come home and do their social technology. And what we're seeing is just that lack of interpersonal connection, and especially during COVID, when we have this fear and the ever-present system of quarantine, where kids are removed from their friends for a period of time, or we don't want to gather too much and have the normal birthday parties that we used to and park gatherings that we used to and going over to a friend's house. And with winter approaching, we're going to be indoors more. So we're seeing that lack of connectivity with our kids. And it's interesting, especially with the election, no matter which side or no side that you were on, we saw all of these things resonate within social media. And I know I did with my kids, where all of a sudden there's arguments in between children about political views, social views, or even cultural views that are getting posted. So as parents, what we always encourage is to have those conversations with your kids, challenge them for that, to challenge those ideas and say, we understand that this information is being fed to you. Why do you have that opinion? I want to hear from you. And just last night, I had a 2-hour conversation with my 16-year-old about DACA. Like, I didn't even know she knew about DACA. It was amazing. So all of these things were so important to me as a step parent, but especially as a member of the community and a clinician and outreach manager with EVBH, to know that, like Dr. Lisa said, we can be so afraid and be very intimidated by the very real and necessary information that was just presented. But it also gives us power to have those conversations with our kids. And if we're able to positively model that behavior, like Dr. Lisa also said about putting our phones down, making those weekly time limits, really having kids understand that it's important to communicate with each other, while at the same time, as a parent, it's very difficult to not be the nag right now, because technology isn't just a release for our kids and a release for us, but it's the portal and pathway for our education system when our kids aren't physically in the building, for either during a hybrid model or quarantine, or approaching towards different community levels with COVID ratings. So my best recommendation is to really understand the technology portals that our schools are using. And I've had even a conversation with my 13-year-old, like, no, I already turned it in, it's fine. But it shows on Power School they have a missing assignment. So I said, no, buddy, it's missing. No, that was on a different platform. That was Google Classroom. It's not going to show up here. And so many parents say, oh, well, that's overwhelming. And I just taught my kid all day, or balanced childcare, and did my job. And it's very exhausting to try to then sit down and look into all these technological platforms. So if you reach out to your school, you join all of our district newsletters with the educational tech forums, you can really begin to understand how our systems work. And then you can have those conversations with your kids where it's feeling less stressful, in order to provide that oversight. Because then technology can be used as something where, oh, I turned that assignment, see? And then you can see, because you understand the system, as to where it's going, when it was turned in, and oftentimes not having to go back to either the school counselor or the teacher asking all these questions, because it is very intimidating and overwhelming. And that piece of stress removes that level of nagging with your child when it comes to those school assignments. And then you can focus on those healthy behaviors in a social media platform. A lot of our technology, what we're seeing with our kids right now, and I'm so glad we brought up Instagram and TikTok and different forums that I didn't even know about, which is terrifying. And it's tailored to the activity that our children present online. So if I immediately open up my child's phone and I can see this recent activity, it's really geared toward what he has been looking at. So you don't have to be doing all of this digging on the main screen. And it's about that trust and honesty, where if they're looking at something they shouldn't be looking at, it's going to be ever present in a lot of their search history and a lot of their home pages with all of these different applications. And paying attention, like Dr. Lisa said, to those hashtags is very important. Monitoring screen time. So that's something that I know Dr. Lisa mentioned we also have in our house. And granted, does it work all the time? No, because I'm on here right now. And if my kids were here, it would be, well, you get to be online. I don't get to be online. And I wouldn't know what they're doing in the other room. So really understanding and building those trusting conversations and relationships with our kids to make sure that they understand rules in our home are, yeah, you have 2 hours of screen time, but we really have to hold ourselves accountable, because we're exhausted at the end of the day with everything going on. So if we really make sure that we have that pact with ourselves, our kids can see that we are holding ourselves to that rule. They need to follow it as well. And like I was talking about earlier, the interpersonal connection and communication with kids, it's put in a difficult spot for them because they're not seeing all their friends during the school day if they are allowed to go to school, if they are within the school building. Some of them have different schedules. And when they're at home, they're not socializing together as more due to safety concerns. And if they are, it's in a short and limited time frame. So the majority of their time is really spent connecting socially on a screen. So really making sure that you connect as a family and do something engaging, or even have those conversations with your child when they're not in front of their screen, to make sure that you're not doing it too. Because those are impactful, meaningful things that they can look back on and also something to look forward to. Which us at Eagle Valley Behavioral Health and all of our support groups, we really tailor a lot of our hopeful conversation to pinpointing an event or something that your family collectively can look forward to do together. That's something that your children can say, well, that's a piece where we're all going to be together. And it's not just in front of a screen or having to do with the technology. Maybe it's not even a movie sometimes, it's a board game. And we did that the other night. So there's ways to really get creative with this, and making sure, like I said, to communicate with your district staff and to make sure that you truly understand the ins and outs of what your child's school day looks like, how much time they really need to be online, because it's not as much as they say sometimes, and really making sure that they have those screen and mental health breaks just like you do.
Thank you so much, Kayla. I had a few questions that were submitted to me before tonight's presentation that I just want to toss up to both of you. And actually, before I say that, Kayla, I can't remember if it was in our email correspondence or if I read it in an article that you wrote, but something that our family has been doing for years that I feel like has been a great way to connect without a lot of talk, but to really get to the heart of how the day is at the dinner table, rose, thorn, and bud. And it always is surprising and never really what I think. And it just gives this pinhole of a view into the day in a way that my usual questioning wouldn't. So I really appreciate that. And, you know, some ways I think that we think this time together needs to be really planned out and needs to be this extravagant vacation or something like that. But it's really a handful of minutes of connectivity can pay dividends. At least that's what I've been noticing. And I'm grateful, Dr. Lisa, for so many of your tips I've gleaned from this evening. I have a small cohort of children in my home, and we're homeschooling. And one large takeaway that I took is sometimes when my second graders are kind of on break from virtual learning, they go on YouTube and they look up Taylor Swift videos and things like that. And I have on my little notepad here, like, no more, we're watercoloring, that ship has sailed. And we can figure out Taylor in a book from the library or something like that. But I'm so grateful for all these tips, because it just continues to give us these pieces of education that we need, and we can slowly start implementing them and heighten our awareness and really start to pay attention in a bigger way. And to that point, I had a question that was submitted that someone wants, like, the nitty gritty, the how-tos of putting on controls on, say, understanding Google searches that were deleted. And I'm wondering if on your website there is kind of a step-by-step guide for, you know, a lot of us moms feel like, gosh, I to your point, Kayla, I don't know how to get in there and understand this technology. It's kind of over my head, but I want to have these controls. I want to be participatory. Is there some sort of step-by-step for how we can view or put those controls on?
That's a great question. I think that probably over the last 10 years for myself, I've written a ton of them. I don't, Kayla, for you, I don't know if you've done step by steps, but typically I'll get a request that comes in and I will basically go through and say, all right, what specifically are you looking for? Is it Android? Is it iOS? Is it laptop? Is it whatever? And then I pull that content and then deliver it to them. So I would welcome anyone in your community to reach out to me and send a message and to say, hey, can I have help on this? Because there's so much information on, just like Kayla was talking about, like looking in your phone and the screen time that's being used on there. And I'll have kids that say like, oh, like that's weird, my screen time's off. So you have no idea what exactly they're doing. So I think that that's a really good question. But again, I'm happy to provide that. I probably have about a dozen of them, like old blogs and things like that. I would just want to clean it up and make sure that it's actually accurate for now, because that is one fantastic piece of the tech industry's magic, is that they change those all the time, so that it's harder for parents to go in and find.
And I highly encourage too, if we had a comment in our chat, please reach out to your school resource officers. They do a lot of presentations with our prevention classes and our prevention partners as to really how to look at this in a healthy way, because we as adults can get into wormholes too. And we, if of course with reason, as the right as parents, have the ability to go in and make sure that our kids are safe. But at the same time, I appreciate what Dr. Lisa said about kids do want a level of privacy. So how do they earn that? And what does that look like? And if you're starting from ground zero due to finding something, you want to make sure, just as with self-harm, not to shame that situation, but to open that up in a conversation as to why. Because oftentimes they are feeling lonely and isolated and wanting to be liked. And cognitively, my 13-year-old could post something where he thinks it's hilarious because he's modeling something on TikTok, but he looks like a little kid doing something that an adult would be doing, like the WAP dance. So there's certain things that we should be really familiar with, and reaching out to community partners that have those resources. We're happy to show you how to do it in a healthy way.
That's
And
wonderful.
Amy wanted to plug one more thing, because Mountain Youth is blowing up on the chat with opportunities, events, and activities. So I really wanted to make sure that you went to Mountain Youth's website and eaglevalley.bh.org in order to see what kind of virtual and social distancing safely events that we can do, either virtually or in person. I know that Mountain Youth has a lot coming up. And like I was talking about earlier, our kids really need that socialization. They need that interpersonal connection. And if we push that more and we're really reestablishing those environmental relationships, it really helps them not be as attracted to screens.
Thank you for that, Kayla. We do. Through Valley's Voice, there are quite a few events coming up, so please go onto Mountain Youth's website and check that out. There's in-person events, there's virtual events. I'm signed up for everything, so I'll see you virtually or I'll see you live. We have an incredibly innovative team that is working so hard. Annabelle Johnson, who is really doing her darndest to create pro-social events during this time and keep our kids connected and happy and healthy. So we are grateful to her efforts. So I'm gonna bring this session to a close here. And you know, this idea of not my kid, it's a tricky conversation to have, but you know, incredibly important. And Dr. Lisa, we are grateful that you have come here and presented this material to us and opened yourself up to be in communication with anyone that would need support in any way. And Kayla Bettis, as always, thank you for all you do for our community. So we're taking a break for December, because I'm sure there's a lot of virtual Christmas parties that everyone will have to be attending, but we'll be back on January 20th at 6 p.m. with Dr. Tina Bryson, and she'll be presenting on the power of showing up. So please stay in touch with Dr. Lisa. All of her information is in the chat. Information on Olivia's fund is in the chat as well. And before we end, our tech wizard, Maddie, is going to spin some kind of wheel, and you're going to win a phone jail where you can lock up your technology and do a puzzle and get Moe's barbecue and have a great night doing rose thorn bud and connecting with your family. And she's going to tell you who that winner is just in any second. So you just hold on to your horses and don't go anywhere and just stay right here. And here it goes. Something's happening. Our executive director just won. We're spinning again. Oh, lots of great names on here. And my husband just won. We're going to spin one more time. Lady Luck is on our side. We're buying a lottery ticket tonight. Okay. Ooh, all good people. Is that it? Erica McIntosh, thanks for staying tuned. We'll be in touch to deliver your prize, and everyone, please keep taking really good care of each other, and we hope to see you on January 20th for the next one. Take care. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you, Dr. Lisa.